Welcome to the repose of history. This is a place where we journey into the past so you can fall asleep easily and enrich your mind. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button right away, because by the end of this lecture, you'll be fast asleep. Close your eyes now. The story is already beginning. What if the most enigmatic myth in history wasn't a myth at all? Where was Atlantis? Was it a real civilization, vanishing in a single night, or merely a philosophical tale? In this video, you will discover what Plato truly said about Atlantis, the description of its magnificent city, its powerful army, and its immense wealth. You'll learn about its war with Athens and the cataclysm that led to its downfall. We'll explore why it was forgotten for 1,000 years, how the search for it spread from Bimini to Antarctica, and why Atlantis remains an enduring mystery that captivates the entire world. Suggest new video topics in the comments and subscribe to the channel. New bedtime stories are posted here every day. The story of Atlantis does not begin with archaeological digs or ancient myths passed down through generations. Its roots lie in a text written at a specific time by a specific individual, the Athenian philosopher Plato. Before him, in none of the sources that have reached us, be it Sumerian cuneiform tablets, Egyptian inscriptions, or Greek legends, does the name Atlantis ever appear. Everything we know about it today originates from two of Plato's dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. To understand how this story was born, we must look into Plato's own life, his aims, and the world in which he was raised and shaped. Plato was born in the 5th century BC in Athens, a city that was, at the time, far from its golden age. His family belonged to an ancient aristocracy with influence and connections in political circles. Among his relatives were Charmides and Critias, participants in the oligarchic regime of the 30 tyrants, which came to power in Athens after its defeat in the Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesian War was a catastrophe for Athens. The defeat meant a loss of political power, economic decline, internal strife, plagues, and a profound moral crisis. All of this unfolded before the young Plato's eyes. He witnessed the old order crumble as one regime replaced another, democratic, oligarchic, then democratic again. And each time, instead of justice and order, society plunged into new conflicts. In his youth, Plato became a student of Socrates, a man who had a decisive influence on him. Socrates did not write treatises or seek to create systems, but his method of dialogue, his relentless pursuit of truth through constant questioning, left a deep mark. Plato watched as his teacher questioned the very foundations of Athenian democracy, accused his fellow citizens of moral blindness, and called them to self-knowledge. It all ended tragically. Socrates was tried, found guilty of corrupting the youth and impiety, and executed. The execution of Socrates was a profound shock for Plato. He lost faith in Athenian democracy and concluded that a just society could not be built if its citizens lacked philosophical knowledge, if it was ruled by people driven not by reason, but by passions and greed. It was this idea that became the foundation of all his works. Around 387 BC, Plato founded the Academy, the first philosophical school in history, where students studied mathematics, astronomy, music, logic, ethics, and politics. It was here that he wrote his major works, including the dialogue The Republic, an attempt to describe an ideal society. It was within this same pursuit that the two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, were born, where the story of Atlantis first appears. The dialogue Timaeus was written around 360 BC. On the surface, it deals with the structure of the world, the origin of the universe, the nature of the soul, the movements of the stars, and the harmony of the cosmos. But right at the beginning, almost as a preface to these profound thoughts, a mysterious story is told, that of an ancient conflict between Athens and Atlantis, a mighty power that existed beyond the Pillars of Hercules, that is, outside the Mediterranean Sea. Plato does not tell this story himself. He references a specific chain of transmission. The story was allegedly heard by his great-grandfather, Critias the Younger, from his grandfather, Critias the Elder, who in turn had heard it as a child from Solon himself, the great Athenian lawgiver who lived 2 centuries earlier. And Solon had heard it from Egyptian priests in the city of Sais during his travels. Plato presents a dialogue in which an Egyptian priest, addressing Solon, speaks the famous words, "O Solon, Solon, you Greeks are always children." The priest chastised Solon, saying that the Greeks did not preserve the memory of ancient history, as their civilization had been repeatedly destroyed by wars and catastrophes, while the Egyptians had maintained written records for millennia. According to the priest, these chronicles held a record of an event that occurred 9,000 years before Solon's time. Back then, there existed a vast power called Atlantis, possessing immense military and economic might. Atlantis attempted to subjugate the entire known world, including Athens, but the Athenians, despite their modest resources, managed to repel the attack and preserve their freedom. Soon after, Atlantis perished. According to the priest, in a single day and night of misfortune, it was swallowed by earthquakes and floods, vanishing into the depths of the ocean. It's important to emphasize that Plato presents this account not as a myth, but as a supposedly reliable historical tradition passed down through generations. Yet, it remains unclear whether he himself believed in its authenticity or used it as a philosophical allegory. The context of the Timaeus suggests that Plato was less interested in history and more in using the story of Atlantis as an introduction to his discussions on cosmic harmony and the structure of the ideal state. Yet, he takes pains to make the story seem plausible, providing names, describing the meeting place, and detailing the circumstances under which Solon learned the tale. After the Timaeus, Plato began work on the Critias, which was meant to describe Atlantis in detail, its political system, architecture, customs, and way of life. However, the text breaks off mid-sentence. The reasons are debated. Perhaps Plato never finished it. Perhaps he intentionally left it unfinished. There was a plan for a third dialogue, Hermocrates, meant to conclude the entire story, but it was either never written or has not survived. Plato's contemporaries and philosophers of subsequent eras were skeptical of this story. Aristotle outright stated that Plato invented Atlantis to vividly illustrate his views on moral decay, pride, and the consequences of abandoning virtue. However, over time, the line between philosophical parable and the search for a lost civilization began to blur. The key thing to understand is that Atlantis is not rooted in folk myths, oral traditions, or ancient chronicles. Its story appears at a specific historical moment, in a specific text, created by a specific individual. It is part of Plato's philosophical reflections on how fragile states and civilizations are when they are based not on reason and virtue, but on greed, pride, and a lust for power. When Plato, in the Critias, moves to describe Atlantis, he begins not with moral or political reasoning, but with a detailed account of its geography, layout, resources, and appearance. According to him, Atlantis was located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what the ancient Greeks called the strait we know today as Gibraltar, separating the Mediterranean Sea from the Atlantic Ocean. The island was enormous, larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined, and occupied a vast space in the midst of the endless ocean, which the Greeks simply called the Outer Sea. The natural conditions of this land were astonishing in their abundance. Atlantis had fertile plains, broad valleys, and high mountains covered with dense forests that supplied the inhabitants with timber for building ships and houses. Rivers flowed from the numerous mountains, feeding lakes and canals, and in some places hot springs gushed forth, providing both cold and warm water for homes, gardens, and baths. The island teemed with animals of all kinds, including herds of cattle, goats, sheep, and, Plato particularly emphasizes, elephants, for whom there was ample food and space. The soil of Atlantis yielded abundant harvests of all conceivable grains, fruits, and vegetables. Orchards grew fruit trees, with vineyards holding a special place, along with olive groves and groves of unusual fruits unknown to the Greeks. Beyond common crops, the earth produced rare and valuable plants used in medicine, crafts, and perfumery. The heart of Atlantis was a majestic city built around a hill where, according to legend, the god Poseidon once met and fell in love with a mortal woman named Cleito. To protect her, Poseidon encircled the hill with 3 rings of water and 2 rings of land, creating alternating belts connected by bridges. These rings had precisely defined dimensions: an inner canal 3 stadia wide, then a belt of land of the same width, then a new canal 2 stadia wide, more land, and finally the widest outer canal of 3 stadia, connected to the sea by a dug channel. The city's infrastructure was remarkably well planned. All the canals connected with each other and with the sea, allowing ships to enter the port and unload right at the city walls. Quays, shipyards, and arsenals lined the canal banks. Bridges spanned the canals, and the entrance to the central city was protected by gates and towers. The city walls were built from 3 types of stone: white, black, and red, quarried on the island itself. These walls were sheathed in metal, the inner wall with orichalcum, the middle with tin, and the outer with bronze, giving the city an incredibly beautiful and brilliant appearance, especially in the sunlight. At the city center stood a huge temple to Poseidon and Cleito, entirely faced with silver on the outside and orichalcum on the inside. Inside the temple was a giant statue of Poseidon standing in a chariot drawn by 6 winged horses. Surrounding the god were statues of his children, the 10 sons born to Cleito, each of whom later became the ruler of one of Atlantis' 10 regions. Next to the temple stood the royal palace, a true complex of halls, rooms, gardens, and terraces. Its floors were paved with mosaics of ivory, precious stones, and gold. The walls were paneled with orichalcum and covered with copper plates, and the roofs were adorned with tin inlays. The interior gardens were filled with exotic plants, pools of fresh and salt water, fountains, and promenades. Atlantis' economy was based on highly developed agriculture, mineral extraction, craftsmanship, and international trade. The central plain surrounding the city was a vast rectangle. This plain was divided into plots, crisscrossed by a system of parallel canals 100 feet wide, spaced 300 feet apart, with transverse canals connecting them, ensuring drainage, irrigation, and transportation. Each region had its own military, and economic specialization. Plato details how food supplies were organized, taxes collected, and the army mobilized. For example, it specified exactly how many chariots, infantrymen, archers, and ships each region had to provide in case of war. A strict system of accounting and governance existed based on ancient laws given by the first ruler, Atlas, and his brothers. The political structure of Atlantis was a union of 10 kingdoms, each ruled by a descendant of Poseidon. Supreme authority belonged to the eldest of the kings, the ruler of the central city, but the others retained significant autonomy. All important decisions were made at a common council that gathered periodically at the temple of Poseidon. Before the council, the kings swore oaths of loyalty to the gods and to each other, performing a sacred ritual. They would capture a bull without weapons, sacrifice it, wash their hands in its blood, and then, standing before the altar, swear to uphold the laws, protect justice, and maintain order. For a long time, Atlantis prospered. Its inhabitants strictly observed the laws, honored the gods, preserved morality, and cared for the well-being of their society. Luxury did not blind them, wealth did not corrupt their souls, and power did not turn into tyranny. Atlantis was a state where the divine principle within people still held power. And because of this, society remained harmonious and stable. But as generations passed, the divine nature in the souls of the Atlanteans began to weaken. Increasingly, their actions showed a lack of virtue and justice, replaced by greed, a lust for gain, pride, and avarice. The splendor of the palaces grew. The festivals became more extravagant, the armies more aggressive, and the rulers less inclined to keep their sacred oaths or care for the welfare of their subjects. It is from this moment Plato emphasizes that the gradual decline of Atlantis began. The great power, once founded on harmony with the gods and nature, began to turn away from the laws of its ancestors. Instead of seeking justice and maintaining order, the Atlanteans began to strive to expand their power beyond the island, to subjugate neighboring lands, and to accumulate wealth at any cost. Plato's description of Atlantis' structure ends here. His subsequent narrative is devoted to where this gradual moral decay led. Namely, how Atlantis, desiring to rule the entire world, faced resistance from free Athens and met its own destruction. When Plato, in his dialogue Critias, moves to the story of Atlantis' fate, he begins at the moment when the great island, having attained unprecedented power, ceased to be content with its own wealth, order, and prosperity, and turned its gaze to the entire known world, seeking to extend its dominion over all lands, on both sides of the Pillars of Hercules. According to the Egyptian priest from whom this story purportedly came, Atlantis, having subjugated numerous islands and significant territories on the shores of the Mediterranean, extended its rule over Libya as far as the borders of Egypt, and over Europe as far as Tyrrhenia. The peoples of these lands were forced to pay tribute, provide troops, ships, cattle, metals, and everything Atlantis demanded to maintain its might. This drive for further conquest was motivated not by concern for security or need for resources, but by internal decay, that moral crisis which began when the divine element in the souls of the Atlanteans weakened. Their behavior was increasingly determined by greed, avarice, and a thirst for limitless power. It was at this moment that the rulers of Atlantis decided to subjugate Athens, a city that was, according to the priests, completely different from what it became in later times. These ancient Athenians, as Plato recounts, were a society built not on luxury or military strength, but on the principles of virtue, justice, and strict adherence to the laws given by the goddess Athena. The city's inhabitants lived simply, worked hard, honored the gods, and cared not so much about accumulating wealth as about harmony among themselves and with nature. Athens represented an ideal polis, ruled not by money or force, but by reason, law, and mutual respect. When the rulers of Atlantis decided to conquer Athens, they sent envoys demanding their submission, recognition of Atlantean supremacy, and the start of tribute payments, as other peoples had done. The Athenian response was unequivocal. They rejected any encroachment on their freedom and refused to submit to a foreign power. Moreover, they immediately began preparing for war, understanding that no compromise was possible. Soon, Atlantis began its mobilization. According to Plato's description, the army of Atlantis was grandiose in scale. Thousands of chariots, tens of thousands of infantrymen, numerous cavalry squadrons, and a huge fleet capable of transporting troops across the ocean and enforcing a prolonged blockade of the coast. The city's shipyards worked non-stop, forging weapons, building new ships, and stockpiling provisions. The army was equipped with the best weaponry of the time: bronze armor, swords, spears, shields, ballistae, and catapults. The Athenians, understanding they faced an enemy vastly superior in numbers and material resources, conducted a general mobilization. All men of fighting age took up arms. The city prepared for defense, strengthening walls, building additional fortifications for a potential siege, stockpiling food, and manufacturing weapons. But most importantly, the Athenians relied on their unity, the courage of their citizens, and the aid of their patron gods. The first stage of the war was a naval blockade. Atlantis sent a fleet to the shores of Attica to cut off sea routes, deprive Athens of trade and supplies, and then land troops to assault the city. The Athenians, anticipating this, built fast and maneuverable ships, much lighter and better suited for coastal combat than the heavy warships of the Atlanteans. The naval battles were fierce and prolonged. The Athenians attacked enemy ships at night, set ambushes in bays, laid traps among the rocks, and skillfully used their knowledge of the local waters. Despite their numerical superiority, the Atlanteans could not achieve success at sea. After several major defeats, they realized that capturing Athens from the sea was impossible and began preparing a land operation. The army landed on the coast of Attica and began advancing towards the city walls, hoping to take Athens quickly. However, the Athenians used the strategic advantages of the terrain. They fortified mountain passes, built barricades, mined approaches to key roads, and prepared defensive positions on hills and in gorges. The land battles lasted not days or weeks, but months. The Athenians waged a flexible defense, launching sudden counterattacks, setting ambushes, striking supply trains, destroying provisions, and disrupting communications. The Atlanteans, accustomed to quick victories and total dominance, found themselves drawn into a protracted war where their numerical superiority offered less and less advantage. They lost soldiers in the mountains. Their troops were depleted in futile attacks on fortifications, and attempts to break through to the city were constantly thwarted. The climax of this campaign was a major battle in which the Athenians, using feigned retreats, lured the main Atlantean force into a narrow valley where ambushes had been prepared. From three sides, a hail of arrows, stones, and infantry assaults rained down on the enemy. The surrounded Atlanteans tried to break out, but the terrain prevented them from deploying their chariots and using their heavy infantry. The battle ended in the complete rout of the Atlantean army. Simultaneously, the Athenians struck the enemy fleet anchored off the coast. While the main Atlantean forces were engaged on land, the light Athenian ships attacked the enemy vessels, burning those at anchor and sinking heavy transports, depriving the enemy of any chance to evacuate. The remnants of the Atlantean army, having lost contact with their fleet and suffered enormous losses, fled. The victory was absolute. The Athenians had not only defended their land, but had proven that virtue, unity, courage, and fidelity to the law could overcome any numerical or material superiority. They did not pursue the fleeing enemy or make demands of the defeated. Athens did not seek conquest. They had only protected what was most important to them: their freedom, their independence, and their laws. Thus ended the war between Athens and Atlantis, a great battle in which a civilization founded on justice, virtue, and respect for the gods triumphed over a state where wealth, power, and a lust for domination had overshadowed moral foundations. However, the story of Atlantis itself did not end there. Defeated, humiliated, and weakened, Atlantis soon faced another, far more terrible enemy: the forces of nature, against which neither army, nor fleet, nor wealth could stand. When Plato, in the Critias, approaches the climax of his story, he describes the moment when the gods, observing Atlantis, could no longer remain indifferent to how a people once living by their precepts had completely lost its virtue, succumbed to greed, arrogance, and a thirst for limitless power. The island, once the embodiment of harmony, order, and justice, had ceased to follow the laws established by Poseidon for his descendants, thereby violating the fundamental order established in the world by the gods. Zeus, the ruler of Olympus, gathered all the immortals in his hall to decide what punishment should befall Atlantis for its pride, for abandoning piety, betraying justice, and placing its own might above the will of the gods. Plato describes this moment in detail: how Zeus addresses the other gods, how he rises above them, looking down upon the earth, and begins to speak. But we never hear his speech. It is at this very point that the dialogue breaks off. Nevertheless, the story's conclusion is evident. Plato makes it clear that soon after these events, Atlantis disappeared. The catastrophe was sudden and devastating. In one day and one night, the island was swallowed by monstrous earthquakes and gigantic waves. The earth split open, the ground gaped, torrents of water washed away cities, temples, palaces, and all fortifications. Everything created by generations, canals, quays, gardens, temples, markets, residential quarters, vanished as if it had never existed. The island sank. Where once the temples of Poseidon stood, the palaces of kings rose, and bustling ports thrived. Now there was only an empty expanse of sea. Plato specifies that shoals and muddy shallows formed where Atlantis had been, hindering navigation for a long time. Sailing through those waters became dangerous. Sunken ruins and sandbanks made the sea impassable for ships. The destruction of Atlantis, as the Egyptian priests emphasize in Plato's account, was not an accident, a whim of nature, or the result of a random natural disaster. It was the direct consequence of the moral fall of its inhabitants. The gods were indifferent to how rich their temples were, how powerful their armies had become, or how extensive their trade networks were. The only thing that mattered was the preservation of the order based on harmony between humanity and the cosmos, on respect for the laws and the gods, on virtue and justice. When this order was violated, when the people of Atlantis rejected the commandments of their ancestors and replaced them with a lust for power and wealth, retribution became inevitable. First, Atlantis lost the war to Athens, which, according to Plato, were at that time a model of justice and moral order. And soon after, a blow came from nature itself, governed by the will of the gods. But the moment of the catastrophe itself, despite its obvious significance, remains almost undescribed in Plato's dialogues. He only states the result, the island's destruction, but does not depict the process. How the walls crumbled, the palaces were flooded, people fled, the canals tore apart, and ships were torn from their anchors and plunged into the abyss along with the cities. Why does the story break off? There is no answer. Perhaps Plato intentionally left the story unfinished, so that everyone who heard it would ponder the causes, the consequences, and the meaning of this destruction. Perhaps he wanted to emphasize that the essence lies not in the details of the destruction, but in its inevitability as a consequence of the loss of virtue. Or perhaps the reason was more prosaic. The text was simply never finished, or its ending was lost. It is known that Plato planned a third part of the trilogy, a dialogue called Hermocrates, which was meant to complete the cycle begun in the Timaeus and continued in the Critias. We can only speculate about the content of this work, but most scholars believe it would have either described the aftermath of Atlantis' destruction or drawn a philosophical conclusion from the entire story, showing how the lessons of this catastrophe should be understood by future generations. One way or another, the destruction of Atlantis, as described by Plato, remains not just a tale about the sinking of an island. It is a story about how even the most powerful civilizations, possessing immense wealth, mighty armies, great cities, and incredible technological achievements, remain vulnerable if they lose their inner foundation: virtue, justice, and respect for the divine order. Atlantis disappeared. It ceased to exist both physically and in the history of that time. But the memory of it did not vanish completely. This memory lived on in stories, in rare records, in echoes of myths. However, for many centuries, its story almost faded from human consciousness. After Plato told the world the story of Atlantis, the fate of this legend was largely forgotten for centuries. Even the next generations of ancient thinkers perceived it more as a philosophical parable than a real account of the past. Even Aristotle, Plato's student, asserted that his teacher invented Atlantis for instructive purposes to illustrate his own ideas about laws, morality, and the structure of the ideal state. In the following centuries, practically none of the major historians, Herodotus, Polybius, Strabo, Pliny the Elder, showed any interest in this story. It almost never appeared in geographical works, historical chronicles, or philosophical writings. The perception of Atlantis gradually narrowed to it being considered merely a figurative example meant to show the consequences of losing virtue and abandoning the laws of the gods. In late antiquity, as classical philosophy gave way to Neoplatonism, the name of Atlantis still surfaced occasionally, but exclusively as an allegory. Philosophers discussing the structure of the cosmos, the immortality of the soul, or the laws of the world order might mention it, but not as a real place, rather as a symbol of the fall and destruction inevitable for any civilization that loses its connection with the divine order. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed and the Middle Ages began, interest in ancient philosophical traditions almost completely died out. In Europe, an era commenced where questions of morality, theology, and the salvation of the soul became more important than any reflections on the past, geography, or the nature of the world. The Platonic dialogues continued to exist. They were copied in monasteries, stored in the libraries of Constantinople, and studied in the Muslim world. But the story of Atlantis within these texts remained something secondary, almost unnoticeable against the backdrop of other ideas. Medieval thinkers did not outright reject the existence of Atlantis. They simply showed no interest in it. Its place was taken by biblical tales, stories of Sodom and Gomorrah, the Great Flood, and the Tower of Babel. If Atlantis was mentioned at all, it was usually in the context of general reflections on how God punishes proud nations. Sometimes it was referenced in commentaries on Plato, in rare encyclopedias, or treatises by Byzantine authors, but these mentions were always brief and lacking independent significance. Even medieval cartographers, drawing a world populated by wonders and unknown lands, almost never included Atlantis on their maps. Their imagination gave birth to images of the Fortunate Isles, the earthly paradise, islands of saints, or places where Christian relics were supposedly hidden. But the idea of a sunken continent beyond the ocean did not become part of the medieval imagination. And yet, the legend did not disappear. It continued to exist in copied versions of Plato's dialogues. It was preserved in the works of Arab scholars, in the library of Constantinople, in the works of the few Byzantine philosophers and theologians who maintained an interest in the heritage of antiquity. Atlantis did not resonate loudly, but its name did not completely vanish from cultural memory. It was this silent presence that allowed it to survive the Middle Ages. And when Europe once again turned its attention to its ancient heritage, when the era of the Renaissance and the great geographical discoveries began, the name of Atlantis once again became relevant. Ahead lay new hypotheses, attempts to find its traces in the oceans, ideas that it might be connected to the New World or to lost islands. With the end of the Middle Ages and the dawn of the Renaissance, interest in classical heritage in Europe rapidly revived. The works of Plato, including the dialogues featuring the story of Atlantis, were studied anew. What had been perceived for centuries as merely a philosophical parable now became the subject of serious reflection not only among philosophers, but also among geographers, travelers, navigators, and cartographers. This was the period when Europe moved beyond its familiar boundaries. Portuguese and Spanish ships crossed the Pillars of Hercules, ventured into the Atlantic Ocean, and found new islands and lands whose existence ancient geographers had not even suspected. The appearance on maps of the Azores, the Canaries, Madeira, and many other territories prompted the thought that these lands might be the remnants of the huge island described by Plato. Gradually, the idea formed that the story of Atlantis was not just a philosophical allegory, but possibly a memory of a real, sunken civilization. And the first candidate for the role of its trace became the Azores. Their location in the very center of the Atlantic Ocean, far beyond the Pillars of Hercules, matched Plato's description. Moreover, the mountainous nature of the archipelago suggested that these might be the peaks of a sunken continent once rising above the ocean. The Canary Islands were also actively considered. Researchers paid attention to their ancient inhabitants, the Guanches, who, before the arrival of Europeans, preserved a unique culture, unusual rituals, and legends about ancestors who came from large lands that had disappeared into the sea. These traditions began to be linked to memories of Atlantis, suggesting that the Guanches might be the last descendants of those who survived the catastrophe. But the boldest hypothesis emerged with the discovery of America. Soon after Christopher Columbus's voyage and the discovery of the New World, voices began to suggest that Atlantis was America. The immense continent, hidden beyond the ocean, seemed a perfect candidate for the role of the sunken world. This thought was prompted not only by the continent's size, but also by the astonishing achievements of the Indian civilizations, the Maya, the Aztecs, the Incas. Their cities, temples, roads, and astronomical knowledge captured the European imagination. And to many, it seemed that such a high level of development simply could not have arisen without a connection to some ancient, highly advanced civilization. These ideas found reflection in the works of philosophers, chroniclers, and geographers. On 16th century maps, one could often see labels like Atlantis or Island of Atlantis placed in various parts of the Atlantic Ocean, from the Bermuda area to the Caribbean islands and the coast of Brazil. Some cartographers suggested that Atlantis was a giant sunken continent. Others depicted it as a chain of islands remaining after the catastrophe. In parallel, the first attempts to explain the disappearance of Atlantis from the perspective of natural processes, not mythology, began to appear. Versions increasingly surfaced that the island could have sunk as a result of powerful earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, slow subsidence of the Earth's crust, or giant tsunamis. This idea seemed particularly plausible in light of the fact that such catastrophes had indeed occurred. For example, the volcanic eruption on Santorini, which destroyed the Minoan civilization, became for many a kind of model for the destruction of Atlantis. Nevertheless, despite the enormous interest, no convincing evidence of Atlantis' existence was found. Neither in the Azores, nor the Canaries, nor America, nor the Caribbean did archaeologists discover ruins, artifacts, or evidence of a civilization comparable to Plato's description. And yet, the very possibility that a land which could be Atlantis existed beyond the horizon continued to excite the imagination. Gradually, interest in Atlantis moved beyond purely geographical or historical searches. It began to become part of literary utopias, philosophical reflections on the fate of civilizations, and a source of inspiration for writers, travelers, and even mystics. The legend began to acquire new meanings. It was no longer just a story about the destruction of a proud people, but a symbol of a lost golden age, an ideal society that sank beneath the waves but continued to live in humanity's dreams. And yet, the real explosion of interest in Atlantis, its transformation into one of the most discussed and popular mysteries of its time, would occur only in the 19th century with the appearance of individuals who would reinterpret it not only as a philosophical myth, but as a real, material civilization whose existence could supposedly be proven. By the beginning of the 19th century, the legend of Atlantis ceased to be merely an episode from Plato's works and turned into an independent cultural phenomenon, generating interest far beyond academic debates. It became a subject of discussion among writers, travelers, seekers of ancient knowledge, proponents of esotericism, and later among the first researchers attempting to rely on scientific achievements. Several factors contributed to this. First, the 19th century was an era of archaeological discoveries, when Europe began to realize that many ancient legends and myths concealed real events. It was then that Pompeii was uncovered, Troy was excavated, and digs began at Nineveh and Memphis. Each such success seemed to confirm the idea that a myth is not always a fiction, but sometimes a distorted memory of real civilizations. Second, the 19th century was a time of the rapid flourishing of esoteric teachings, interest in occult knowledge, secret societies, and the search for humanity's lost spiritual heritage. Within this system of beliefs, Atlantis easily transformed into a symbol not just of a perished civilization, but of a lost golden age when people supposedly possessed knowledge and abilities long forgotten in the modern world. A key event was the publication of a book by American writer, publicist, and politician Ignatius Donnelly. His work, titled Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, instantly became an international sensation. In this book, Donnelly argued that Atlantis was not a myth or a philosophical allegory, but a real, highly advanced civilization that stood at the origins of all known cultures of the ancient world. He constructed a long chain of arguments, comparing myths, legends, architectural traditions, and cultural characteristics of the peoples of Europe, Africa, and America. In his view, the disappearance of Atlantis was linked to a global natural catastrophe, as a result of which a huge continent located in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean sank beneath the waves. Donnelly believed that it was the Atlanteans who spread knowledge of agriculture, metallurgy, navigation, architecture, and writing throughout the world. His book quickly became a source of inspiration for a whole wave of followers. From this moment on, Atlantis ceased to be a topic of exclusively academic dispute. Now it was discussed by everyone: researchers, geographers, writers, mystics. A huge number of hypotheses about its location appeared. Some continued to search for it in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Others suggested it might have been South America. A third group pointed to the Caribbean basin, a fourth to Antarctica or even the Arctic. Parallel to this, interest in Atlantis grew in mystical and occult circles. Its image was used particularly actively in the theosophical teachings of Helena Blavatsky. According to her version, Atlantis was not just an island or a continent, but an entire epoch in human history. An era when a special race, the Atlanteans, dominated the earth, possessing supernatural abilities and spiritual knowledge. In her texts, Atlantis became a projection of a golden age, destroyed because its inhabitants abandoned the spiritual path for the sake of power, materialism, and technological might. Dozens of new versions arose based on these ideas. The Atlanteans were credited with inventing flying machines, using crystals for energy, controlling weather phenomena, telepathy, and the ability to influence matter with the power of thought. All this intertwined with myths, conjectures, occult teachings, and fantasies that spread with extraordinary speed. Atlantis became an integral part of 19th century artistic culture. It was described in adventure novels, science fiction works, and utopias. It appeared on the pages of newspapers, in popular pamphlets, and in reports of geographical societies. Gradually, the image of Atlantis moved beyond the bounds of the ancient myth and turned into a universal symbol, a symbol of a lost ideal, a vanished paradise, a mystery that humanity strives to solve. However, it is important to note that all these hypotheses, no matter how impressive their presentation, were almost entirely lacking support from real archaeology or geology. Their basis was the comparison of myths, interpretations of legends, free analogies, and the author's personal conjectures. The scientific community of the 19th century, while observing this boom with interest, regarded it with obvious skepticism. Nevertheless, it was at this time that an important transition began. The first researchers appeared who decided to test the hypothesis of Atlantis' existence not only at the level of mythology and text, but with the help of scientific tools. The first underwater investigations, geological expeditions, and studies of the ocean floor structure began. Atlantis began to gradually move from the realm of philosophical and mystical reasoning into the sphere of scientific inquiry. By the beginning of the 20th century, the legend of Atlantis had definitively transitioned from the realm of philosophical reflection, mythology, and esotericism into a sphere where it began to be considered a potentially real historical puzzle. Fantasies, mystical constructs, and unsubstantiated hypotheses were replaced by attempts to rely on data from archaeology, geology, and oceanography. For the first time in millennia, the myth of Atlantis became the subject of systematic scientific interest. One of the most serious and influential hypotheses of the 20th century was the version linking Atlantis to the catastrophe that occurred on the island of Santorini in the Aegean Sea. In the mid-20th century, archaeologists discovered the well-preserved Bronze Age city of Akrotiri under a layer of volcanic ash. Its streets, houses, frescoes, sewer systems, and developed infrastructure impressed with their high level of culture. Researchers concluded that a powerful volcanic eruption in the early 15th century BC destroyed this city and dealt a crushing blow to the Minoan civilization on Crete. This very catastrophe, accompanied by giant tsunamis, earthquakes, and long-term climatic changes, became a model that began to be compared with the destruction of Atlantis. This was indicated by the signs of a high level of development, the suddenness of the catastrophe, and the virtual disappearance of an entire civilization. However, the main argument against this hypothesis was geography. Santorini is not beyond the Pillars of Hercules, as Plato wrote, but within the Mediterranean Sea. Furthermore, the discrepancy in time amounts to thousands of years. Plato states that Atlantis perished 9,000 years before Solon, i.e., in the 10th millennium BC, much earlier than the Santorini eruption. Another wave of interest was associated with the discovery in 1968 off the coast of Bimini, a small island in the Bahamas, of a strange underwater stone structure that became known as the Bimini Road. Neat, regularly shaped blocks, laid in a long line, at first glance resembled the ruins of a wall or a paved road. Photographs quickly spread around the world, and claims that these were the remains of Atlantis appeared in newspapers and magazines just days after the discovery. However, further research showed that the Bimini Road is a natural geological formation, the result of natural stratification and erosion of limestone slabs common in the region. Scientists found similar formations in other parts of the Caribbean, confirming its natural origin. Nevertheless, for many proponents of Atlantis' existence, Bimini long remains symbolic proof that it could have existed. A separate line of hypotheses directed the search for Atlantis to entirely unexpected places, like Antarctica. This theory became especially popular in the second half of the 20th century, thanks to the works of Charles Hapgood, who put forward the hypothesis of Earth crust displacement. According to his version, Antarctica in the distant past was located in warmer latitudes, was free of ice, and could have been home to an advanced civilization. A shift in the Earth's crust led to the continent ending up at the pole, freezing, and becoming inaccessible to life. These ideas found many supporters among enthusiasts of mysteries and alternative history, but did not withstand criticism from the scientific community. Modern data on the geological past of Antarctica show that the continent has been covered in ice for at least several million years and could not have been the location of a civilization analogous to the description of Atlantis. Parallel to the development of the Bimini, Antarctica, and Santorini hypotheses, the 20th century saw the rapid development of underwater archaeology. With the invention of scuba gear, bathyscapes, and the advancement of sonar mapping of the ocean floor, scientists gained the ability to explore oceanic ridges, underwater plateaus, and shelves with unprecedented accuracy. As studies progressed, it became clear that no hidden continent exists beneath the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. All the relief structures of the ocean floor, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, the Azores Plateau, underwater canyons, are of tectonic origin and are not the remnants of sunken continents. At this stage, the scientific community concluded that the hypothesis of Atlantis' existence as a material island in the Atlantic Ocean had no serious foundation. Geology and plate tectonics leave no room for the idea of a continent suddenly sinking in a single day and night, as described by Plato. Such processes develop over millions of years. Nevertheless, despite the skepticism of official science, the search for Atlantis did not cease. It shifted to other regions. The shelves off the coasts of Morocco and Spain, islands in the Caribbean Sea, the Black Sea, where cases of catastrophic rises in sea level in antiquity had also been recorded. Hypotheses emerged that Plato might have deliberately altered the parameters of the description, multiplied numbers, changed chronology, or moved geographical landmarks in order to create a philosophical parable about the moral fall of a civilization, not to convey a literal history. It became increasingly clear that Atlantis is not just the search for a geographical object, but the search for a universal symbol. The legend continues to live because it speaks to an eternal human fear, the fear of the collapse of civilization, of destruction that comes when a society loses its balance, when it loses its moral foundation, when it forgets about harmony with nature and the laws of justice. By the end of the 20th century, Atlantis had definitively become an integral part of not only archaeological disputes, but also popular culture. It appears in books, films, documentary projects, becomes the subject of journalistic investigations, and a topic of discussion in university lecture halls and on popular forums. The legend of Atlantis has survived millennia and continues to exist in the 21st century in scientific hypotheses, cultural myths, cinema, books, and endless discussions. Although academic science views it more as a philosophical metaphor than a historical fact, interest in Atlantis remains alive and well. Modern scientific data are unequivocal. Oceanographic research, maps of the seafloor, and models of tectonic plate movement show that there are no sunken continents in the Atlantic Ocean. At the same time, some historians and archaeologists continue to look for a rational grain in Plato's story. Among the most serious versions remains the hypothesis that the myth of Atlantis is a reflection of real catastrophes that occurred in prehistoric times. However, the real interest in Atlantis long ago transcended the bounds of science. It has become part of global cultural mythology. Its image can be found in film, literature, comics, video games, and sci-fi series. Atlantis is portrayed sometimes as a sunken high-tech city, sometimes as a magical world hidden beneath the waves, sometimes as the last trace of an ancient race that possessed super knowledge and lost technologies. From the science fiction novels of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells to modern blockbusters and animated films, Atlantis remains a symbol of a lost golden age, a dream of a great past, a forgotten knowledge and harmony that humanity once possessed but lost. Today, Atlantis is simultaneously a myth, a metaphor, and a cultural phenomenon. For science, it remains an unsolved mystery, a hypothesis whose discussion continues despite all geological refutations. For popular culture, it is an inexhaustible source of inspiration, a symbol of a lost ideal. And for the human consciousness, it is a reminder that power, technology, and wealth will not save a society if it loses its connection with moral foundations. Harmony and the laws of nature. The myth of Atlantis lives on, and perhaps precisely because it was never just a story about a land that vanished into the ocean. It has always been a story about us, about how civilizations are built, prosper, and make mistakes, and about how there's always a chance to learn a lesson from it. Thank you for joining me on this captivating journey into the world of ancient myths. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to like the video, write comments, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories that bring antiquity to life and make it feel closer. Until next time,